After my daughter got married, I discovered that the love I missed most was always my own. I remember that day perfectly. Anxiety tightened my chest almost unbearably, but there was also a twinge of happiness, a shy glow amidst the fear. It was my daughter Isabella's wedding. She was radiant, her face lit with pure joy, the kind we only feel when we believe life will work out. While everyone smiled and prepared for the big moment, I struggled to maintain a balance between pride and the weight of the past. I wanted to be whole, but inside, I felt a mix of excitement and fragility. It wasn't just the event that made me nervous. It was the echo of everything I'd faced before. Every loss, every choice, every moment I'd had to feign strength when I just wanted to fall apart. I didn't know if I was ready to deal with another big change, but life didn't wait for us to be ready. It simply happened. The hotel ballroom where the wedding would take place seemed like something out of a dream. Golden lights reflected on the crystal ceiling. The marble floor gleamed under the guests' hurried footsteps, and the flowers exuded a sweet scent that mingled with the distant sound of the orchestra tuning its instruments. Everything was perfect, at least to the outsider. Inside, I felt the opposite. Every detail of the setting seemed to crush me, as if the beauty of the moment reminded me how far I had strayed from my own happiness. With each breath, an old memory washed over me, and I struggled to hide the slight tremor in my hands. I was the mother of the bride, and I should have appeared confident, radiant. But deep inside, the past insisted on whispering that I had not yet healed from everything I had experienced. When I watched Isabella getting ready, surrounded by her friends, I realized that time had passed faster than I'd imagined. It still seemed like yesterday she'd come running through the hallways of my house, her hair loose and her laughter loud, asking me to comb her dolls. Now she was a grown woman, ready to stand on her own 2 feet. This realization hit me like a gentle blow, proud and painful at the same time. I looked at myself in the bedroom mirror and barely recognized my reflection. There were wrinkles where before there had been only hope. My eyes were still the same, but they held too many stories. And for the first time in years, I realized how much I'd forgotten about myself along the way. As the guests arrived and the music began to fill the room, my heart raced. I knew this moment was about her, about love and the new life that was beginning, but I couldn't help but look at it all with the weight of my own memories. It was as if Isabella's happiness forced me to face everything I'd missed. For so long, I existed solely for her, trying to fill the void left when life took away my certainties. Motherhood saved me, but it also swallowed me. And now, seeing my daughter ready to move on, I realized I would have to learn to live again. Not as a mother, but as a woman. This idea frightened me more than anything. The moment the ceremony began, and Isabella entered arm in arm with her father, I felt something inside me shatter and mend at the same time. The soft sound of the music, the glow of the lights, the emotional looks of the guests, everything seemed distant. I saw my daughter smiling, and for a moment, I felt my mission accomplished. But I also understood that this was the beginning of my own new beginning. Her life was opening, like a new book, while mine needed to be rewritten. I didn't know how or where to begin, but there, with tears in my eyes and a pounding heart, I realized there was still so much within me that I wanted to live. As the party ended and the hall began to empty, a strange silence descended upon me. I watched people say goodbye, laugh, exchange hugs, and noticed how each of them went on with their lives. It was past midnight when I was left alone, standing in the middle of the hall, surrounded by the remains of flowers and forgotten glasses. The scent of roses mingled with the smell of alcohol and exhaustion. It was then that I realized my daughter was gone. She now had another home, another routine, another world. The house that had once been full of voices and movement would be mine alone again, and I didn't know if I was ready for this silence. It was as if time had suddenly returned to me the loneliness I had learned to hide. In the days that followed, the emptiness became almost physical. I would wake up early, make coffee for 2 out of habit, and then remember there was only 1 cup to fill. The sound of the cutlery, the sound of the wind blowing through the curtains, everything seemed to scream Isabella's absence. I tried to occupy my mind with household chores, but even cleaning lost its meaning. There was no one left to make a mess, to leave a wet towel on the couch, to ask for a cuddle in the middle of the night. I began to realize how much I had lived for her, and how much this prevented me from looking at myself honestly. Without her presence, I had to face what was left of me, and the reflection wasn't pretty. It was made of patches, guilt, and an old weariness. One day, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and let my gaze drift toward the horizon. That's when the memories began to come, one after the other. I remembered the day Isabella's father left, the nights I cried in secret so as not to worry the girl, the years I spent trying to prove I was strong. And maybe I really was, strong enough not to crumble. But now, without needing to be anyone's foundation, I felt completely lost. I discovered I no longer knew who I was outside of my role as a mother. The silence that had once frightened me began to become a mirror. In it, I saw a woman who had grown old trying to be everything to others and forgetting to be something for herself. In Isabella's room, everything was as she had left it. The photos, the books, the notes stuck to the mirror. I entered one night and stared at every detail, as if I could relive a time that no longer existed. I sat on her bed and cried silently, not only from longing, but from the knowledge that a part of me also needed to leave. I couldn't remain trapped in what had already happened. But how could I start over after years of living for someone else? How could I return to being the master of my own life without feeling guilty? It was a confusing sensation, as if I had been freed from a prison and, at the same time, unsure of what to do outside it. It was on one of those lonely nights that something inside me began to change. I looked in the mirror and realized there was still life in my eyes, even behind the marks of time. There was a woman there, tired, yes, but also eager to discover who she could be from now on. And it was at that moment that I decided, for the first time in a long time, that I wanted to find myself again. I didn't know how I would do it, but I was certain I couldn't continue simply surviving. It was time to live again, not as a mother, nor as an ex-wife, but as Helena. The first steps were timid. In the days following my decision, I began going for morning walks. The neighborhood felt different, as if I were seeing it for the first time. The morning wind touched my face with a gentleness I hadn't felt in years. I began to notice simple details. The bird song, the smell of freshly baked bread from the corner bakery, the sun shining through the leaves. Of the trees. Little things I'd previously ignored because I was always too busy with other people's worries. I discovered that life was there, in the everyday, waiting for me to stop and notice it. Little by little, the weight inside me began to lift. The loneliness still hurt, but it no longer paralyzed me. It was as if, amidst the silence, I was learning to listen to myself again. Over time, I returned to the things I'd left behind. I dug out my old notebooks, filled with notes and poems I'd written when I was younger. Among those yellowed pages, I found a version of myself that time had almost erased. Dreamy, intense, full of plans. I spent hours reading what I'd forgotten I was, and suddenly, I felt the urge to write again. I picked up a pen and let the words flow without much thought. They came out clumsy at first, but as I wrote, something inside me rearranged itself. It was as if I were piecing together the pieces of a life that had shattered along the way. Writing became my refuge again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt pleasure in being with myself. One late afternoon, I decided to visit the art studio in the central square. I always passed by it, but never had the courage to go in. This time, something compelled me. The room smelled of paint and wood, and the sound of soft conversations mingled with the instrumental music playing in the background. I was greeted by a smiling woman named Estela, who invited me to participate in a Saturday painting workshop. I accepted without much thought. At the first meeting, my hands trembled, unsure, as if I had forgotten how to create something just for the pleasure of it. But as I began mixing colors, fear gave way to a sense of freedom. The blank canvas seemed to hear me, welcoming what I couldn't say out loud. And little by little, I began painting my own healing, too. Over the next few weeks, Estela became a friend. We talked about art, about loss, about new beginnings. She had a calm way of seeing life, as if she understood that everything has its time to blossom. One day, as we watched the sunset through the studio window, she said to me, "Sometimes the love we most need to rediscover is our own." That phrase echoed within me for days. I realized that for a long time, I had sought to be loved, to feel that I existed, but I had never learned to truly love myself. That was what was missing. More than a new direction, I needed to accept myself completely, with my flaws, scars, and fears. And this discovery, as simple as it was, made me feel alive again. When Isabella called me, I could now truly smile. She told me about painting classes, walks, and coffee alone at the downtown bookstore. She said she was proud to see me well, and I replied that I was just learning to take care of myself. And it was true. Not that the longing had diminished, but I learned to transform it into something beautiful, into gratitude. Life was showing me that love doesn't have to end to change its form. I was still a mother, but I was also once again a woman, a friend, a learner. And deep down, I realized that this transition was the most beautiful part of starting over. It was on one of those afternoons when the sun seemed to play on the studio windows that I met Miguel. He was a photographer and had been invited to photograph a group exhibition of his students' work. When he arrived, he had a camera slung around his neck and a serene smile, the kind that disarms even the most wary of hearts. He stared at my canvas for a while, silently, until he said, "Your colors have something melancholic and beautiful at the same time, as if each brushstroke were a memory trying to heal." I didn't know what to say. It had been so long since someone had looked at me with sensitivity, without haste, without judgment. That simple compliment, coming from a stranger, stirred something deep inside me, a part I thought had lain dormant forever. Miguel began visiting the studio more frequently. At first, our conversations were short, shy, but full of curiosity. We talked about art, the power of images, and how time changes the meaning of things. He had a calm way of being, as if each gesture were a pause in the chaos of the world. Gradually, our exchanges became more intimate. We talked about our losses, about loves that passed, about the paths life insists on retracing when we least expect it. And without realizing it, I began to look forward to his visits. His presence brought me a kind of peace I didn't know I could still feel. One afternoon, after class, he invited me for coffee. I accepted. We talked for hours, as if time had forgotten to pass. Miguel listened to me with rare attention, not trying to fix anything, just welcoming me. When I mentioned how long it took me to find meaning in life after my daughter left home, he simply said, "Maybe that emptiness was the space life created for you to fit back into yourself." I remained silent, absorbing those words. They made sense. For the first time, I understood that what I called loneliness could also be an invitation, a fertile space to begin again. The following weeks were light, different. Miguel sent me photographs he took during his walks, crooked trees, old windows, children running in squares, and said each image carried a piece of calm. I, in return, sent photos of my unfinished paintings. Our exchanges were simple but sincere, and little by little, I began to feel a kind of discreet joy growing within me. It wasn't the euphoria of youthful love, but something more serene, mature, tranquil, a silent affinity that built slowly. And perhaps that was what made it all so beautiful, the lack of rush, the freedom to simply feel. One night, as we walked along the shore, Miguel took my hand. The gesture was gentle, almost shy, but full of meaning. There was no promise, no declaration, just a silence that spoke volumes. I looked out to sea and realized how everything had changed. The wind, the sound of the waves, my own body, lighter. For the first time in a long time, I felt the past no longer defined me. I could allow something new to emerge without fear of losing who I was. Miguel didn't come to fill what was missing, but to remind me that I could still feel. And in that moment, I knew I was finally ready to move on, with my heart whole, but at peace. Time passed, and life reorganized itself gently, almost imperceptibly. Miguel and I continued to see each other, without labels, without demands. Sometimes we painted together, other times we just walked in silence, observing the world. He taught me to see beauty in the intervals, in the pauses, in ordinary days. And it was like that, without rushing, that I realized something fundamental. I no longer needed major events to feel alive. It was enough to be present, whole, in the now. The pain that once shadowed me began to dissolve, not because it disappeared completely, but because I learned to live with it without letting it define me. I understood that life is made of cycles, and that each end carries the beginning of something we don't yet know how to name. Isabella, when she visited me, said I seemed different, lighter, more serene. I smiled and replied that I was just learning to be. She watched me tenderly, perhaps realizing that her mother had finally found herself. We talked for hours, exchanging confidences as two women, not just as mother and daughter. It was beautiful to see that the love between us had matured. There was no longer dependence, no guilt, only respect and affection. When she left, I no longer cried. I missed her, yes, but a good kind of longing, the kind that warms the heart and reminds us how generous life can be when we allow ourselves to begin again. One morning, I woke before sunrise. The sky was still covered in shades of gray and lilac, and cold air drifted in through the open window. I went to the kitchen, made coffee, and sat on the porch with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The world seemed quiet, suspended, as if waiting for me to fully wake up. I closed my eyes and thought about everything I'd experienced: the pain, the fears, the falls. But I also thought about the small victories, the reunions, the moments I chose to stand when it would have been easier to give up. It was then that I realized that happiness doesn't arrive all at once. It comes gradually, disguised as peace. And in that moment, I felt that peace embrace me completely. Miguel arrived, soon after, with 2 cups of coffee and a lazy smile. He sat beside me, and we sat in silence, watching the sunrise. Golden light flooded the balcony, and I could feel the warmth touch my skin as a reminder that time, despite everything, remains generous. He looked at me and simply said, "You look beautiful like this, quiet, at peace." I smiled, not out of vanity, but out of gratitude, because for the first time in many years, I saw myself through my own eyes, and I liked what I saw. The woman who had once hidden behind her responsibilities now blossomed, whole, imperfect, and free. Today, when I reflect on everything, I realize that life didn't break me. It simply shaped me differently. Each loss taught me something. Each silence brought me closer to myself. Isabella followed her path, I found mine, and love, in its different forms, continued to be the bridge that keeps us standing. I don't need perfect endings, just simple truths. And the greatest of these is that starting over isn't about forgetting the past, but learning to walk alongside it, without fear. That's how I started living again. That's how I discovered that freedom, after all, was always within me.